an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Haunting of Bly Manor, Season 1, Episode 5, The Altar of the Dead. In this episode, it turns out that indeed, Hannah Gross has passed on, and yet she really hasn't. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. You guys, I feel so vindicated, man. I really do. Like, the whole thing about how Hannah wasn't eating. It's, been pointed out that there are occasional moments where it looks like she takes a drink or a taste or a sip of something. I cannot tell y'all how, despite the fact that I saw this was coming, I think it was just so well done. And this episode in particular is super duper well done. I feel like this is one of the more beautifully constructed episodes of television I've ever seen. It's just so gripping from the moment that it starts. You know something's off. You've been so curious about Hannah the entire time. And I feel like that really adds an aspect to the whole thing as well, of how slowly built the mystery surrounding her is. There is so much that I wouldn't have expected Hannah's point of view to clarify. And that was an added bonus. Being in her point of view, I kind of thought, okay, we're going to just find out what's going on with her. But really, no, it's about more than that. She has seen everything that's happening. And that is extremely, it's so upsetting to know that she is amongst them, that she's talking to them. And if we knew the circumstances, and if she was able to maintain her hold on present reality, we could, I don't want to say clear all this up, because that really makes it sound like just a conversation and this will be taken care of, and that's not it at all. But there are so many things that everybody is puzzling over that she holds the answers and the key to. I find it really interesting, based on the fact that I'm going to continue from here on out to say that it was Peter who killed her, because that's, who was in Miles at the time. Miles is physically the one who pushed, but obviously did not have control of himself. It was not his choice. And he remembers a vague sense of it. But what happened to Peter was something that was viewed by all three of them. Flora, Miles, and Hannah were all in the hallway and all saw what happened. And so, the children have been, I would assume, operating as if they are in on a secret with her. But it has not felt, as a viewer, like she was in on the secret, because of the fact that she is displaced in time, right? Her memory is just jumping all over the place. Her consciousness is jumping all over the place. And so, for her, it isn't that she's in on the secret, not the same way that they think she is. And I really wonder about that. If it's sort of been odd to the kids that she hasn't talked about this or brought it up. I don't know. Oh, I didn't think of that. Ariel says, I don't think she was there at the time. She was just in a memory of it, like the pensieve. Okay, I thought that she was, that she did actually see it, but due to everything, it's just been like going in and out of her head. Ashleigh says, I don't think the kids know. I don't think Flora has a doll for her. Oh, that the kids don't know that she's dead. Yeah, no, I don't think so either. I'm talking about that the kids are aware that she knows what happened to Peter. But if what Ariel is saying is correct and she wasn't actually there for that, it would explain why the kids don't seem to behave in a way that indicates she's in on the secret at all. So that makes more sense. Thank you, Ariel. Because I was sort of like, it's odd that they don't seem to like give her looks or, have the sort of unified front about trying to keep Danny in bed sort of thing. But if she wasn't actually there and she's just seeing a memory, and that's a particularly interesting thing to me, is like, how can she see these memories? Because we have a moment where she is in Rebecca's memory, and Rebecca comments on the fact that she's in her memory, that this is like, a specific one that she likes to come back to, but she doesn't get it often, which indicates that she doesn't have control over the memory she's plunged into, and we know Rebecca haunts the place because we have seen her around. So somehow, being a ghost amongst other ghosts, it seems as if that means that you have access to their memories somehow. And I don't know if you can choose, or if you just, it doesn't seem like you can, because the ghosts can't choose their own. So I would assume you just get sort of plunged into whatever you get plunged into, and it's not necessarily, something that you've chosen to participate in at all. So let's see. Ariel says, it seemed like it was Rebecca's memory, and that Rebecca had just been saying she never goes out to actually see him die because it's just too terrible for her. I don't know that's one of those things, because like, I feel like that is his memory. And so I don't think that Rebecca witnessed his death, is what I'm saying. I think that Rebecca has access to the memory of his death and chooses like to avoid it. If she can't, like, there was no indicator to me that she saw what happened or would be able to pull up a full memory of what happened. So I feel like that's not as literal as it sounds. But, I could be wrong about that. Okay, Ashleigh says, no, yeah, she was definitely in bed. She said, I think this is when it happens. And that also indicates Rebecca, by the time she died at least, or maybe after death, she knows Peter didn't like flee and abandon her. Now, I'm very curious whether or not in life, before she either killed herself or was dragged into the lake, whatever happened, I'm very curious as to whether or not she knew he hadn't abandoned her then, if there was some sort of despair in thinking he had, or if it was the house and the lady in the lake working on her somehow, or what. There's all kinds of things that could have led to her winding up in the lake. The fact that Peter gets pulled so completely under, to the point that he has not been found and everyone thinks that he is abroad somewhere, that has to mean, in my opinion, that's modus operandi for the lady in the lake. And therefore, I don't think the lady in the lake is the one who killed Rebecca. Because that would be that's a departure for her body to be allowed to float free and be found, and for it to be put down as suicide. That said, perhaps Rebecca saw his body and was trying to retrieve him, or she saw a reflection of the memory of it happening and followed it in. I don't know. I am very, very curious about the Lady in the Lake's origin as well, because she, as we see this episode, does not have any eyes. So that's part of the whole, opening sequence where all the portrait's eyes are covered over. And there's a really fascinating line this episode where Flora says they say to keep away from her. So the kids have got a sort of like connection to the ghosts in the house, and they all appear to be afraid of the lake ghost, which that feels that's real bad. When you've got a bunch of like supernatural beings around, and they all agree that one in particular is bad news, that is just not something that you want to be messing with. And it makes me sort of wonder, because the whole thing... Can you guys hear that? There's this like weird thing going on with my desk. Apologies if that's showing up on mic, but it's like this clicking. I am wondering if the thing that's going on with her dollhouse is... I mean, obviously we know that there's a bit of an alarm system, that they sort of keep track of the Lady of the Lake using the dolls that represent them each. Now, do the other ghosts in the house function as sort of like watchdogs? And is that how... Because like I had been sort of thinking the Lady in the Lake's spirit is somehow attached to the doll that Flora made. And therefore, when she chooses to move, the doll moves as well of its own accord because of its attachment to her and it's sort of mimicking what she does. But I'm starting to think maybe it's not that. Maybe the doll is meant to represent that ghost. The other ghosts in the house are aware that's what it does. And they signal to Flora something's going on by going into her room and moving that doll themselves. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I'm just curious. But yeah, there's something about the ghosts like that we have seen in her dollhouse, each being apparently assigned to a certain space. There's a place that they all stand consistently. And that just feels to me like, you know, soldiers at their post somehow. The obvious exceptions being, first of all, Rebecca's ghost, who we've seen just sort of wandering around aimlessly. Obviously Peter's ghost, and he was just not willing to let go and is determined to get a fair shot at living, even though his time is over and he just can't come to terms with that. If you're going to find a person who is willing to possess a child in order to get to like live out their own life, I really can't think of a better character for that than Peter Quinn. That is he is such a fundamentally like sort of selfish and a person who just clearly feels like the world's done him wrong in such a grand scale way that he would be able to justify to himself taking over a child, no problem. I really feel for Miles too, so much, because he doesn't remember what happened when he comes out of it. So I think that he is aware something's going on, but you can't say to adults after you've done something fucked up, what just happened? And have them like just answer the question, because they're going to take that the wrong way. Nobody's going to think you're asking that because you were fucking possessed and don't remember literally what happened. They're going to think that there's like that it's you being smart, or they're just going to take it a different way. And so I don't feel like there's much that, even if Miles did sort of know what was going on, what could he do about it? I don't feel like there's anything he could say to indicate to anyone the truth of what's happening with him, unless they get so enmeshed in this whole, like, the house and the mystery, that they begin to think of that as a viable solution. Like, who's going to think, well, obviously the reason that Miles is acting out is not because of his parents' sudden and tragic death, but because he's being possessed by the ghost of a man he once admired. Like, nobody's thinking that. So I really feel for him, because everybody around him wants so much to like give him the benefit of the doubt. We just see over and over again how patient everyone is and how much they all try to like be understanding of the difficulty of who he is and how, like, he's just trying to grapple with this. He's at an odd age, first of all, when it starts to feel like maybe you're going to be moving into adulthood soon, but nobody actually is taking you seriously in the way you are beginning to feel you sort of deserve. He's older than his sister, so there's a certain amount, I'm sure, of feeling responsible for her. The deaths of his parents just, like, playing into that completely. Everybody really is just wanting to be there for him. But then he just keeps doing these fucking, like, omanish, creepy, psychopathic things, you know? And to know that he may be unaware of how people see him, that is also sort of upsetting to me. This feeling of, like, everybody's treating me like I'm sort of dangerous or not to be trusted, and I don't understand why. What did I do? You know? And I wonder if he can feel that, and if he has any idea. The fact that he specifically asked, you know, we saw the flashback to him in school and him asking his teacher if there's, like, a necessity for consent from the person who is being possessed, or the being, because it was swine. And the priest, like, assures him that that's half the thing, is yes, that you do need to consent. And yet we see that's not exactly true. At least in the way that the ghost of Bly Manor operates, one of the ghosts of Bly Manor. I'm wondering, has that influenced him at all? Has that felt like he, you know, was ripped off? Did he ask that question because he remembered what was happening to him? And if he has remembered, does he have a moment of just like, wow, this guy thinks that you have to consent and that it's all about free will, and I know that's bullshit, and this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about? I could really see, if you've gone through some shit, and a person who hasn't is really talking like they know, and giving you answers that you, from your experience, know aren't true. That has got to sour you a little bit on the fucking, like, wisdom of the elders, you know what I mean? But anyway, all right, let me back up here, because obviously we have a ton to get through, and this is an incredibly disjointed episode on purpose. And when I say disjointed, I really meant it when I said that this is an amazing episode. I don't mean that in, like, a negative way. That's just purposefully the way that it is set up. And it jumps right into it in a way that I found a little bit jarring, which is the point, I think, right? So we are at the fire, and we're getting the voiceover. The housekeeper knew more than most that deep experience was never peaceful, and because she knew this ever since she'd first called Bly home, she would always find her way back to peace within her daily routine, and it had always worked. Always. So we see her staring at this wine bottle and looking up as he's talking about how they can't count on the past. And there's a real sense to her as she looks at him that she doesn't remember what she's doing here. It's just very clear. And this is something that I feel is just a testament to what an amazing actress this woman is. Every time we have seen her on this show, there has been an air of her, like, not really being in her body. Just this total distraction and a daydream, but, like, with such intensity and focus that it doesn't feel like the daydream in the way that when we use that word, we usually mean somebody that's sort of flighty and unfocused. And with her, it's always felt almost like she's got headphones on and she's, like, listening to something else. And then somebody taps her on the shoulder and she's like, oh, sorry. Yeah, hi. And this scene, you know, it's just a brief moment of her, like, sort of coming to herself and looking at the wine bottle and slowly sitting up and looking at Owen and letting his words wash over her. And you really know right away, she kind of doesn't know what she's doing here. She doesn't remember what led to this. She doesn't know, like, what's going on. And it's interesting that, as far as we know, everybody else's perception of her is continuous. It's not like, for example, Owen is just sitting there by himself, and then all of a sudden he looks up and she's sitting next to him on the, the bench, and he's like, wow, where did you come from? I didn't hear you walk up. It's not that kind of thing. It seems more like she's going about her, like, there's an autopilot to her actions, and she doesn't totally tune in all the time. So her ghost, there's like, my question is she multiple places at once, experiencing all of these things again? Is the manifestation that everybody is seeing, is that like sort of a placeholder that's a little bit empty until she's called to it? Why would they be able to see it if her mind isn't in her body at that time? And I say body, in the very, like, what is passing for a body? What is fooling everybody? Because as we know, part of my, like, assessment on my theory before was whether or not she was dead was predicated on the fact that she wasn't eating, and that could have been explained both. It could have gone two ways. They could have decided that she was actually going to be like not a person, or it could have been that they were just trying to draw attention to how apart from everyone and everything she always was. It could have been metaphorical, but it seems more and more like it was literal. And I'm really wondering how it works that she can be drawn into mid-scene when she's a ghost already. This isn't her being drawn as a ghost back into a memory from when she was human. We see her drawn back into a moment that she had with Owen after her death. And that is wild. There's almost a sense of like, when she manifests, she's still there, but her mind goes wandering, and she just doesn't have control over that entirely. And it is just, let's see. Ashleigh says, I'm wondering if he is blaming himself for wanting it deep down because the priest said that. Oh, you're talking about Miles with the consent thing. That's an interesting question, because that's part of what Danny said last episode with Miles about how she, when she lost her parents, she felt like she had to be older than she was. Or her father, it was. Because her mom was around, but like kind of not really. And maybe that is supposed to be part of it, is that Miles is just so eager to grow up that this, older man who's super cool, attractive, just was sort of like welcome to him. And he just, it's, it doesn't really feel like it should count when it's a child who doesn't know what they're getting into, but I don't know how these contracts work. Seem very informal. And then Ashleigh says, I think most of the time she's not in the scene when this is happening, and she will just turn up. Example, when Miles faints and Danny panics, she comes into the room with no explanation of where she'd been. The thing is, though, that was off. She was coming into the room. And we saw this scene, like from the outside, and she had been sitting next to Owen. That is where Danny and Jamie, they walked away and left the two of them sitting there. So we know that she has been a part of this scene for like what feels like at least half an hour by now. And yet she's only just tuning in the midst of the conversation. So that's what I'm talking about. It's like when she runs in from off screen, it could be anything. But when she tunes in and she's in the midst of a chat with somebody, that's where I get kind of confused as to how this works. And, I may not get the explanation for that. That's fine. I'm just wondering if there is one or not. So he is talking here about his mother and about the future and the sort of the oddness of life and our future and whether or not we really should depend on having one. because things could be taken away from us at any time and we have no idea when it'll happen or if it'll be right now or tomorrow. And, little do we know just how relevant this actually is, because he is dealing with his mother's death, and a great big component of that for him was her dementia. And the thing that she doesn't realize here, as she hasn't pieced together that she's dead, there is what's the word I want? There is almost an implication before we really find out what's happening that maybe that's what's going on with her as well. That she is having some sort of issue with placing memory because of dementia. That maybe even that's part of what drew her to Owen and Owen to her, is the familiarity of somebody who has experience with this sort of illness and crisis, tragedy, really, because that can happen. You just sort of sense that somebody gets it and you are drawn to that person. But it turns out that's not what's going on in very literal terms. It just seems to actually reflect what's going on with her in terms of her overall consciousness. And he says something terrible, and I say terrible because that's the word he uses, even though I don't think it is, about how, in truth, his mother being gone is kind of a relief. And she understands, of course, completely what he means, as would anyone, I'm sure. It's such a shame sometimes how we don't let people share complicated emotions without passing judgment. Because, I had a friend recently, actually a listener, who lost a parent, and she emailed me and was just I'm having such a hard time because apparently nobody that I'm friends with has complicated relationships with their parents. So they don't understand the experience of losing a parent that you weren't close to, that you had a lot of resentment toward, that you don't feel pure sadness over their death. You feel some anger over the fact that problems you had never were resolved. You feel guilt over the fact that you assumed you had more time to resolve them and you didn't do it. And then you feel another kind of resentment over the fact that, yeah, but they're my parent, and if there was going to be a resolution, they should have initiated it because it's their job. And all of these things that, when you don't have an idyllic relationship, which most of us don't, deaths cause a lot of conflicting emotions. And yet, we don't love coping with that. And when I say we, I don't mean media, because media is very fine with investigating that. I mean person to person. We aren't comfortable admitting feeling complicated things to most of our friends, people that we would say were our friends. And I feel that's really the litmus test, right? Is if you can tell a friend something that you almost feel ashamed of, that means that they are a real friend. And I think a lot of us, when you say going through something tragic like this shows you who your friends are, that's often taken as, well, we'll see who's still standing by your side when stuff gets rough. But it's not just about who stays, it's about who you go to also. Because you just really begin to hone in on the people that are going to get it. That aren't going to be horrified by the fact that you're admitting you're a little relieved your mother's dead. That aren't going to be kind of disgusted at the fact that you're still angry at your mother who's dead, So this whole scene, it's just, there's so much mixed in here, and he is just such a good actor, and the scenes between the two of them, I really love the fact that we can understand that there's a romance, and we don't ever get that, consummated in any, official way. There's no kiss, there's no announcement of it, there's no sort of sense of, what's the word I want? It's just implied. Heavily implied, of course. But it's done in a non-traditional way. And in some ways, I feel like that makes this all the more sad to watch and so much more heartbreaking, is this idea that Owen's concern in this scene is that they haven't been living, right? And they've been sort of on pause. And realizing now his life is stretching out before him, possibilities are there, and he is realizing it too late, as is Hannah herself. She was afraid to embrace something new, and we see part of that being abandoned by her husband. And it's sort of like, part of me felt like the storyline with her husband cheating on her and abandoning her wasn't totally necessary, because it was a little bit too much like what happened with Rebecca, and it made me feel a little like, wait, it's just like a similar thing, just a guy that ain't shit running off. But you really do need something to sort of cause her to be extra cautious surrounding getting romantically involved with anybody again. And deciding that she's going to hold herself off from something official with Owen because of what happened to her makes a lot of sense. And then, unexpectedly, she dies. And she never gets to pursue that. And that's part of what he's saying here in this opening scene, is that you just don't know if you can depend on your future. And we all do this. You can't live and not make plans. You just can't. At the same time, there's a difference between making a plan and putting something off because you are that certain you will have the time to get to it. And that's really what it was. She was holding him at arm's length, in a way, because she felt certain eventually the time would come. Eventually the time would be right for them to be in this relationship. It's just not quite right now. And what was the worst that could have happened? He abandons her? Well, no. You got your neck broken in a well. That's the worst that could have happened, and guess what? It happened. So just reminder, everybody, you don't know when a 10-year-old boy is going to shove you down a well, so go live your life. That's all I'm saying. So we go from this scene with him where he's asking her to go to Paris to run off with him. And they're in the midst of this moment, and they get interrupted by Jamie as he's really looking at her, waiting for an answer. And what's so interesting about this episode is the variety of scenes that repeat, but they aren't exactly the same on the repeat. And this is, at the very end of this episode, you get this moment of her finally deciding to embrace the thing and say yes to him and go off with him. And then she looks up and he's in the midst of saying goodbye and hasn't heard her. I would love to get y'all's takes on exactly what you think happened here. Is her saying, yes, I will go, completely in her head, and that's why he can't hear her? Does she sort of go in and out of their attention? And so she's talking, but he doesn't notice that she's talking? Is it supposed to be that because she's sort of stuck at Bly, which is the implication, there's a lot of talk about a glue trap this episode. Is it supposed to be that maybe she wants to accept, and as she's saying it, the sort of I don't even want to say force field, but that feels like the only way to say it, interferes and keeps her words from being heard? Keeps her, because that would keep her from leaving or keep the possibility of leaving from even really being on the table in any way. And that way she won't get discovered. Because if she agrees and then they try to leave, I mean, I don't know what happens then, but I imagine it would be awkward. So I'm very curious about the actual, like, the difference between the way that we see this play out here, where he asks her to run away with him and then they're interrupted. And then we see the way it plays out later. And is that just how it went in her head? Or is that a change that she managed to make and it didn't stick, or what? I'm not sure that it should be taken as literally as I'm taking it, to be perfectly honest. It might just be my problem. So we go into then the first memory that she has with him, which is interviewing him for the job at the Manor. And it's a very, like, sudden sort of shift. She's sitting there next to the fire, looking at the bottle in her hands. And then all of a sudden a voice says, "Are you Hannah?" And she turns, and now she's in the kitchen. And she is sitting in, like, a weird spot, sort of off the, like, to the edge of the table. And this is sort of what I think is done so well with her character and the way that the show sort of foreshadows the fact that she's not alive anymore. Little moments like this, where this may not have been how it actually went in the scene, you know, if we went into her memory, but everything about the way that she stands and sits is just distanced enough from the way everybody else is standing and sitting that she feels distinctly separate from everybody else. And it's just kind of, you know, one of those, like, it's a subtle thing, but it unnerves you. Her chair is facing into a black fireplace that's got no fire in it. And it's not even up against the table. It's, like, pulled off to the side. It's just odd, you know? And so he comes in here and introduces himself. And she still has that sort of distracted quality here. And that is part of why you, like, realize this memory isn't exactly a memory. Like, it's not, it's a version of a memory. But this is all muddled up and jumbled together. So it's not showing clearly how it all went. So when she turns around, she's all weird, and then she says something about her, you know, Charlotte, and I'm sorry she isn't here, but she had to, and then sort of loses the train of thought and looks really, like, upset for a split second because she is remembering somewhere in her head, oh, she's dead. Like, not herself, but Charlotte's dead. That's why Charlotte's not here, is because she's dead. And just a series of moments like that throughout her episode is just her, like, spacing out a bit, beginning to sense something isn't okay, and then coming back and trying to get on with the conversation as if everything were fine and normal. So this interview is so great because they're both sort of seated at the end of this table in a way that's, like, again, just distanced enough. The table isn't between them. They're not sitting at the table in the way that you would imagine. And due to that, there's a sense of it just not, all of it's off. Also, this allows them to be nearer to one another, which is, I feel like symbolic of what the deal is with them as people. So she asks him, why does he want to work here? And he admits about his mother and her illness and wanting to be close to home. And you can see her really, like, warm to him in that moment. And his explanation of just, like, he says something about, like, when things happen with his mother, he won't go running off. And it's awful because, like, that's literally what's happening here. He promised in the interview, if this is to be believed, that he wouldn't go running off, and now he's proposing doing exactly that. And he should. And I think she knows that. But it's still a kind of abandonment, you know? So we cut rather abruptly from here, and, you know, she gets called into the other room, and she acts really sort of, like, flustered at him, like when she gets called into the room. And I think that part of that is her wanting to cling to the moments that she's getting to have with him. So she goes through the kitchen door and finds herself very suddenly in Charlotte's room, in their parents' room. I don't even remember the father's name, actually. Charlotte's really the main player this episode. And this is the first indicator we really get shit isn't right with these memories that she's having, because at first you really think, oh, okay, she's sitting there at the fire drinking this wine. She's watching Owen walk away after this massive, like, proposal that he made, basically. And she's reflecting on their relationship and how they met. But then, as this continues to, like, unspool in front of us, it doesn't feel like a montage of memories. It feels like this is actually happening to her. And it's really confusing and unnerving because she doesn't seem to get what it is either, any more than we do. And every time she enters and exits a room, it's the end of one memory and the beginning of another one. And so we have, like, the parents arriving at the house, and we've got the moment when Peter Quinn gets out of the car. It's sort of like, I am assuming that she had never met him before, is the impression that I get. But he has a real fucking look on his face when he gets out of the car, and it's unclear if something specific happened or if it's just because of the general chip on his shoulder. He's getting the bags out of the trunk, and I think that it might be knowing that he's going to have to do this, that this is his role, that's really rubbing him the wrong way. I like the detail here of the parents who pay no attention to him, immediately go up and greet Mrs. Gross. And then we've got the uncle who sort of, like, turns and watches Peter get the things out of the car, but he doesn't offer to help. So there's this sort of, like, there's almost an acknowledgement from him that this isn't exactly fair, but he's definitely not going to do anything about it. So Charlotte, I also don't know. It seems like she and Mrs. Gross genuinely got along. It seems like there is an actual affection between the two of them. It's hard to know, but I think that's true. And because, you know, it's just always, every time that you're like, okay, here's the rich white lady who's, like, in charge of the house. There's always room for pitfalls there. But it really seems like Hannah believes that there is a friendliness, and that's part of what Peter mocks her for later, is essentially behaving as if this family is her family, that the house is her house, that she has any real part in this is a form of delusion. And he's the one who sees things for what they really are. He's the one who understands that, you know, it's, you've got to do what you can for number one, because when it comes down to it, they are not going to be looking out for you. And what's so difficult is that I really believe that he's right most of the time. I think that this is this is something that has been particularly exploited. Those of us who are millennials know this, and zennials as well, that there was a really successful sort of marketing campaign done by a lot of companies to pretend that, like, by being an employee, you were part of the family, and that the idea was, like, teamwork for the sake of that. But really what it was they were exploiting you for all you were worth, and they intended to absolutely never keep up their end of the deal by taking care of you in return. But we didn't like realize that we were being scammed until it was too late. And that is what he is insinuating is going on here. But I think that Hannah's probably more right than he is. And I think that he doesn't realize that potentially some of the reason that... Oh, sorry, guys. I'm just getting this, like, message from Owen, a text message. I'm thinking that part of the reason that he has this sort of relationship with them, and by this sort of relationship, I mean constantly feeling like resentful and unappreciated, is maybe that he makes it very clear he resents them. And this is where you get into sort of weird territory, where it's like, well, you don't want to have to like kiss somebody's boots in order to be trusted and seen as a potential like partner or whatever it is that he's trying to get. At the same time, making your contempt really clear is also not a great way to approach things. So I don't know. I feel like he has a particular experience that he's treating as if it's universal. And really, Hannah doesn't have as much to worry about as he does in that respect, because she isn't an asshole like he is. You know, like, I don't know. I think that he underestimates the importance of having a decent attitude and actually genuinely caring about the people that you are like detailed with taking care of, and that they can sense the sincerity coming from her, and they know that she is actually, you know, she gives a shit about the children. She likes Charlotte, that this is all real for her. Let's see, I came back to the chat. Ariel says, I think we see the actual scene in the last episode where she kind of laughs him off and then she relives it again while she's figuring out that she's actually dead, and this time suddenly is clinging to life and wants to do all these things she never got to do before. I see what you mean. Because, yeah, she sort of laughs him. Yeah, okay. And, oh, Ashleigh sent me a link to this episode's background ghosts. I'm going to click on that. Just give me 1 second. But, oh, is this... There it is. Oh my God, that's so creepy. By the stairs. Is this the scene where she... Oh, there's one down by the lamp, too. Oh, I don't care for that one at all. The one down by the lamp is worse, I think. If that's what it is. I'm pretty sure it is. It looks like a little face. I'm wondering exactly when this happens, this part, because it's so dark. And there is a moment where she like comes running down the stairs, and it's a very sudden transition also. But anyway, okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted here. So this is really, if this is the first time we meet Peter Quinn, it's the beginning of the relationship between him and her, where you really get to see the origin of their hostility to one another. He has the exact opposite attitude toward being employed by these people that she has. And she doesn't like the fact that he's not hopping to it and doing his best. And oh man, I really relate to both of them, because I have such a chip on my shoulder about like the inequities in the world that I will tend towards turning into a Peter Quinn after I've worked at a place for a little while. I start off as the Hannah and take great pride in my work and feel like there's just a lot of like possibility and potential in front of me. And then I start to realize that like I've been duped a little bit, and all of a sudden I turn this corner and I cannot give any fucks or pretend to give any fucks. So she goes inside after this conversation, and she's in the house, and she's like stops dead as she realizes how dark and empty it is. And she flees outside. It is now dark outside. The two cars are still there, so obviously the family is still in residence. But she comes outside and just wails in pain. And it's an awful moment where I kind of wondered if it wasn't her realizing that there was something going on with her existence. And I guess that is sort of what's happening. But what this is her finding out that her husband has left, I guess, and is with somebody else. I am very curious how she found out exactly what happened here, but we don't get the details on that. It's really not necessary. And this is when she confesses to Charlotte what's going on. And Charlotte offers her to stay at the house, quote, forever if you need to. And I was like, girl, you do not know how much she's going to stick to that. Honestly, that line was kind of what did it for me this episode, was her saying forever if you need to. And I was just like, yep, all right, well, that's what it is then. So, then we see the scene with Miles trying to shake Jamie off a ladder, and him just like really being a shit about it. And there's a moment where she sort of leans her head back, and it's like she feels this pain in her neck, and all of a sudden her head snaps to the side and the scene changes again. And now we know how she died. All of the stuff with her neck is so much more upsetting, honestly. It's very, very upsetting. I hate it. Ashley says it's right after she tells Peter to put the cars away and right before she exits the house upset about her husband. Oh, wow. Yeah, I definitely... I'm watching it now, and usually on the desktop, the colors are clear enough that I'm able to see the ghosts that I wasn't able to see the first time. But that is not showing up for me at all right now, so that's sort of surprising. Do the people who create this show put out a guide to let everybody know where the ghosts are? I guess that they are so small, because the image that Ashleigh sent me, it's like clearly the shot has been halved so that they can focus more in on the stairs off to the side. And that, like, in the context of the full shot, it is really impossible to see. So somebody must be doing a lot of pausing and staring whenever there's a big sweeping like camera shot of the main area of the house. So this scene with Miles is just really like upsetting, and we have eventually a conversation with Owen that is like Owen acknowledging that we've done this before and talking this through with her in a way that feels very much like you would with like a grief counselor or something, and being like, well, this is all you, and apparently we have to do this again. And he says something about how there is something wrong with Miles. And that moment where, I really want to mention, I've been talking about how much the actress who plays Hannah is knocking it out of the park, but the guy who's playing Owen is killing it. Like, this scene goes from warm and amenable and like a lovely memory to really foreboding. And 80% of it is him and the way that he is changing the way he speaks and the way he's sitting and the way he looks at her. And it's just, the transition is so marked, and oh my God, it's really, really frightening. It's there's a moment later where he literally yells at her, denial. And it's not as scary as saying there is something wrong with Miles and getting like really close to her when he says it. So yeah, this is just the moment when she says, have we done this before? And he looks really sad and he says, yes, we have. It's like, it's almost like she is putting him through the same paces that his mother did a couple of times. And he has the same sadness at the fact that she doesn't remember things either. So I don't want to miss things, but I am so close to out of time. Let's talk about Rebecca and the conversations with Rebecca, because basically Rebecca is still super wrapped up in Peter Quinn. She isn't even approaching I'm starting to see what an asshole he is, like, section of the story. And by section of the story, I don't mean that ever actually happens. I mean, when women are involved with assholes, most of the time they begin to see it. Whether they actually leave or get out is another matter. But they usually begin to realize. And she's not even close to that point. She is still making excuses for him. She is still explaining away and rationalizing the way he has behaved. And of course, classic abuser tactic, he first tries to pretend nothing happened. And then when she brings it up and points out that she's not going to forget, he then tries to make it as if it's like he forgot it even happened, which just goes to show that he didn't mean it. So she shouldn't take it as seriously as she has been. And it's just so infuriating to watch because it's like fucking textbook, you know. So, you know, when she's in the church and she's talking to Hannah about him, Hannah says something about how much he scares her. And Rebecca's like, I mean, he scares me too, but like in a good way. And I was like, girl, that is not... She's just so young, and she really doesn't have a good grasp on a healthy thing in your relationships with people, like what to look for. She's looking for somebody who encourages her and believes in her, which is totally understandable. But she doesn't see that he's encouraging her when he wants her to care about him. And then, as soon as she does something that he doesn't like, he wants to suffocate her and completely, like, hide her under a bushel, so to speak. And he's just really conning her pretty well. So she gets up and leaves, sort of storms out. And that is the first time that we get a hint as to what's happening, because Hannah runs after her. As she closes the door of the church behind her, Hannah yanks it back open. And then she sees this like stone wall, and she begins breathing really hard in a way that doesn't like make sense for that moment. And then she hears the clicking, and she turns and she sees Miles lighting the lighter at the front of the church. And there's obviously a connection between all of these things. So what we find out happened, I'm going to jump to the scene of, first of all, what went on with Peter. Peter asks her, Rebecca, to run away with him, and then goes out into the hallway. And as he does, the two children are standing there, looking spooky as fuck. And they mention something about how something's going on with Flora's dollhouse. They heard a noise. He says, I'm sure everything's fine. Go back to bed, both of you. And as he is walking down the hallway away from them with total confidence that it's all fine, he turns a corner and goes and gets that necklace that had been part of a scene earlier that she had gotten him to put back. And he comes back and tells the kids again not to worry, that, you know, I'm just heading out for the night. And it's very interesting to me that that was part of a memory that she had, was him like putting it back. So I'm assuming he took it again, that this isn't like, oh, this is the same memory but over again, and this time she lets him get away with it. I'm assuming that this is, she made him put it back and he went and got it again anyway. And he's standing there telling the kids, I thought I said go back to bed. And just as he says that, this woman materializes out of the shadows, grabs him by the throat, and drags him down the hall in what is undeniably one of the most badass ghost scenes I've ever seen. This is so great, because he's such a dick. And honestly, if this ghost is going to choke somebody out, I wouldn't have picked anyone else. Thank God. You know, good riddance. And I can't help but wonder if the ghost is responding to the fact that he's stealing, or if it just is the fact that he happened to be standing out unprotected, you know, in the main part of the house. Because it feels like the children react to Danny being out of bed as if she is just going to be a target because she's out of bed, period. But they also, I don't think, were aware that Peter was stealing things. So even if it were the theft that was like part of the motivation, they wouldn't really know about that. And I just love, there's a moment earlier where Hannah says to Miles when he's smoking, and she's yelling at him that he shouldn't, "Do you want to die a horrible choking death?" And he snaps the lighter shut and says, "Honestly, Hannah." And he says it in this way that in the moment I'm just like, what does that mean? But now that you know how he actually died, it's so obvious why Peter Miles reacted that way, because he's like, dude, I did. And you know I did. Really? Which is sort of hilarious. And what is so bonkers here is that this ghost drags him down the hall. He's struggling and kicking and choking, and finally sort of like gives it up and falls limp. She goes around the corner, leaving the muddy footprints behind her, by the way, and drags him in through this door. And then all of a sudden, he comes out again, and he seems totally fine. And everybody's like, what happened? What happened to you, though? He acts as if he doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. But when he goes to hold the doll that Flora hands him, he holds it for a moment before it goes right through his hand and hits the floor. And he has just this sort of intense, no, that's not right. And then is able to pick it back up again, but it takes a couple of tries. So part of my thing with why Hannah couldn't be dead was because she interacted with objects and was able to touch things, which I was under the impression was going to be something ghosts couldn't do. And instead, what it seems like is the ghosts are in such denial that they're even dead that they are able to manifest because they firmly put themselves into the mindset that they're fine. So it makes sense that when he's looking at the doll that, you know, looks like the woman who just murdered him, he drops it because seeing it reminded him what happened to him. But then he's able to force himself past it and pick it up and act as if everything is fine. Yet, he turns around and sees the ghost dragging his body out and down the stairs and realizes what has happened. And this is when he throws himself into Miles, and it's not an intentional thing, but he continues this. Once he realizes what has happened, it becomes an intentional thing. And just the moment of him seeing his own body being dragged down the stairs is so great. It is such a great, satisfying moment, and I hated it so much. Like, it's just so creepy. The way that she drags him and the way that his feet just, like, tumble down, that is some really good dead acting. So yeah, this is the first time that he possesses Miles, and the first of many times, as we find out. And then we have there's something wrong with Miles, and the scene where she follows Miles into the woods by the well and sees him talking to Peter and yells at him to get away from Peter. Because in this reality, right, she doesn't know Peter is dead yet. Like, once she has access to the memories of what happened, then she's able to see. But at this moment, she just thinks that Peter's here talking to Miles. And so she confronts him, tells Peter to get away from him, and Peter refuses. And all of a sudden, the camera swings around, and Peter is gone, and it's just Miles. And when she says his name, he says, "Most of the time, but not right now. Believe me, nothing would make me happier than to be arrested by those police, to be dragged off this fucking property away from this god-awful trap." And then, "But you saw too much, so I guess," and then he shoves her over the edge of the well, and she breaks her neck, and the last thing she sees is the crack in the foundation of the well at the bottom, which is the crack that she has been seeing throughout the show in various locations. And so that is the explanation for why this like imagery has been sort of dogging her. And we come back to her looking over the edge of the well, her ghost apparently having manifested almost immediately after this happened. And Miles doesn't remember that he shoved her and thinks that everything is fine. And she's looking down at her own body and apparently hasn't processed exactly what happened to her. So, yeah, this moment, it's just fucked up to know that the first time that Danny meets her, it is like an instant after she was killed. And that's part of why she was so distracted. I think I also mentioned the fact that, she just seemed so distant, and yet she like reaches forward and shakes her hand. So I was sort of like, I was noticing the weirdness of the moment, but immediately put it aside that there was something going on like in the supernatural way, because they were able to shake hands, and I figured that wasn't possible. And it turns out shit just works different at Bly Manor, I guess, And, the story that she tells to Owen, it's such a great story in terms of like the original point that she's making, which is comparing Peter to a glue trap, where the point of the glue trap is supposed to be that it's more humane, but that she found a leg stuck in it, and the mouse had chewed its own leg off to try and get away and then bled to death like a couple of feet away. So she says something about how this girl's going to get away from him eventually, and she's going to think she's fine. And she won't be. And it's just the irony of her saying this when, as it turns out, she's actually dead. She is sort of in the situation that she claimed Rebecca would be in. She thought that she got away from the guy and she thought she was fine. And then to find out, oh no, he killed me and I'm dead. Like, sucks. It sucks. I just really didn't want her to be dead. She's such like, a kind, grounding presence. And the moment where she tells him that she will go to Paris with him and smiles and has this relief, and then she looks up and realizes that he is leaving and doesn't hear what she said, and she's trying to keep him from walking away. It's so tragic, you guys. Like, the all of a sudden it coming together and her realizing why she wasn't able to, like, change anything about the scene, why this didn't happen. The panic, So yeah, she puts the bottle down and she gets up and like runs after him. And it's really interesting because that has been my suspicion, was like before I even knew that she was dead, I said something about like, is it possible that she's just not allowed to leave for some reason? And that does seem to indeed be what it is. She runs after them and she comes up against the like edge of the property, is what it feels like. And she starts reciting to herself who she is, what year is it, where she is, what the ages the children are. And she's doing this repeatedly. And finally, it seems to like sink in after a moment that, yeah, none of this is actually quite correct, actually, like the way that it looked. And it's not like we get all of the answers, because it's still, there's obviously a ton left for us to find out, but this fills in a lot of gaps, and I'm really interested to see how the show decides to continue on with her story now that we know what's going on. And will she completely remember this? Because it seems like she has had to process that she's dead dozens of times, and it never really seems to stick. And I can't tell if we're going to do that over and over, or if this time is supposed to, it will stick. I don't know what to expect there. Let's see. Ashleigh says, mystery I don't think you realized was a mystery. She always lights 4 candles. We knew 3 of them were for the parents and Rebecca, but I think Hannah's been lighting a candle for herself as well, subconsciously. Yeah, I guess that I had always sort of like weirdly thought that one was for Peter, and I don't know why I thought that. It was just, I just sort of filled in a blank there just automatically. But I like that idea, that there's one for... Did she light an extra one for Owen's mom? I don't know if we saw that. But yeah, that's a really rough ending. I just feel for her because, man, it's just not fair. Life just ain't fair, man. And I love the relationship between her and Owen so much. It makes it so much worse when this happens. All right, I'm way over time, so I really have to go. But thank you again to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. This was such a good one, too. And hopefully you guys are enjoying the coverage. And I will be seeing you on Friday with episode 6, The Jolly Corner. All right, guys, see you then. Or I said Friday, Tuesday. Thank you, Ashleigh. Today's Friday. My B. I will see you Tuesday. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.